Every morning at exactly 7:45 a.m., the busy streets of downtown came alive with the usual rush of office workers hurrying to start their day. Among them was Raj Kumar, a marketing manager at Sterling Enterprises, who stood out from the crowd not because of his neatly pressed suits or his confident stride, but because of his daily ritual that his coworkers found rather peculiar. Just outside their gleaming office building, on the corner where the morning sun cast long shadows between the skyscrapers, sat a woman. Her clothes were worn but clean, her possessions neatly arranged in a weathered backpack beside her. Unlike the other homeless people in the area, she carried herself differently. There was something in her posture, in the way she observed the world around her with alert, intelligent eyes, that caught Raj's attention from the very first day he noticed her. On this particular autumn morning, the air was crisp and carried the scent of fallen leaves and coffee from the nearby cafes. Raj stopped at his usual spot, the small coffee shop just around the corner from his office. "The usual, please," he said to the barista. "Actually, make it two today." He always ordered an extra cup and a warm cheese sandwich for the woman, though they had never exchanged more than simple nods and gentle smiles. His coworkers often teased him about his morning routine. "There goes Raj, playing the hero again," they would say. But he didn't mind. Something about the woman's dignity touched him deeply. Even in her difficult circumstances, she maintained a sense of grace that many of his suit-wearing colleagues lacked. As he approached her that morning, steam rising from the coffee cups in his hands, he noticed she was reading a worn copy of a business magazine. Not yesterday's or last week's edition, but one from 3 months ago. She was completely absorbed in an article about sustainable urban development, her finger tracing the lines as she read. "Good morning," Raj said softly, extending the coffee and sandwich. Today, unlike other days, she looked up at him with a smile that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. "Thank you," she replied, her voice surprisingly clear and well-spoken. "You're very kind." Her response startled him slightly. It was the first time he had heard her speak. Her accent was refined, her tone educated. It made him wonder about her story, about the path that had led her to this corner. But like every other morning, he simply nodded respectfully and continued on his way, his mind now filled with questions. Inside the Sterling Enterprises building, Raj made his way through the usual morning chaos. Linda from accounting was arguing with the copy machine again. The new intern was struggling with an overloaded coffee tray, and Mr. Mehta from legal was rushing to make his early morning conference call. At his desk, Raj couldn't help but glance out his sixth-floor window. From this height, he could just make out the corner where the mysterious woman sat. He watched as people streamed past her, most not even registering her presence. A few would look away uncomfortably, quickening their pace. But she remained poised, reading her magazine with the same focus a CEO might give to quarterly reports. Little did Raj know that his simple acts of kindness were about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of Sterling Enterprises. His morning ritual, born out of genuine compassion rather than any desire for recognition, would soon lead to one of the most remarkable stories the corporate world had ever witnessed. The autumn wind picked up, scattering leaves across the sidewalk below, as Raj turned back to his computer screen. Another ordinary day was beginning at Sterling Enterprises, or so he thought. But sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin on the most ordinary of days, with the simplest acts of human kindness. December arrived with a bitter cold snap that transformed the city. Frost decorated the windows of Sterling Enterprises, and everyone hurried through the lobby clutching hot drinks and pulling their coats tighter. The annual holiday party was just 2 days away, and the office was buzzing with excitement and preparation. Raj was in the middle of a meeting of the party arrangements when the first snowflakes began to fall. Through the conference room window, he watched as people on the streets below rushed to find shelter. His thoughts drifted to the woman on the corner. He hadn't seen her that morning, and the weather was getting worse by the minute. Later that afternoon, As Raj headed to the lobby for his lunch break, he found the answer to his morning's concern. There she was, sitting quietly in one of the lobby's plush chairs, her worn backpack at her feet. The building's security guard, Mr. Patel, was approaching her with a stern look that Raj knew all too well. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you can't stay here," Mr. Patel was saying, his voice professional but firm. "This is private property." Raj watched as she gathered her things with that same quiet dignity he'd observed over the past months. Something inside him clicked, a moment of pure human instinct that wouldn't let him just walk away. "Wait," Raj called out, walking briskly toward them. Both Mr. Patel and the woman turned to look at him. She's my guest," he said, surprising even himself with the words. "Actually, I've been meaning to invite her to our holiday party." Mr. Patel's eyebrows shot up, and a few nearby employees stopped to stare. The woman looked at Raj with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between surprise and was that amusement? "Sir, are you sure about this?" Mr. Patel asked, lowering his voice. "The CEO and board members will be there." "Absolutely," Raj replied, finding confidence in his decision. Everyone deserves some warmth and joy during the holidays. He turned to the woman. "Would you like to come? It's tomorrow evening. There'll be good food, music, a chance to stay warm." For a moment, she said nothing, studying him with those intelligent eyes that had first caught his attention months ago. Then, a small smile appeared on her face. "That's very kind of you," she said in that surprisingly refined voice. "But I couldn't possibly attend in my current state." Raj thought quickly. "My sister runs a women's shelter 3 blocks from here. They have a program that helps women prepare for job interviews, nice clothes, shower facilities, everything you'd need. I could take you there now, if you'd like." A few more people had stopped to watch this scene unfold. Among them was Mrs. Kumar from Human Resources, who stepped forward. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she said warmly, shooting Raj an approving look. "I'd be happy to help coordinate with the shelter." The woman looked between them, then down at her worn clothes, and back up at Raj. Something shifted in her expression, a decision being made. "Very well," she said softly. "I accept your invitation, but please call me Priya." As Mrs. Kumar led Priya toward her office to make arrangements with the shelter, Raj stood in the lobby, watching them go. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Priya than met the eye. The way she spoke, her posture, the thoughtful way she considered his invitation. None of it fit with his preconceptions of someone living on the streets. Back at his desk, Raj tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept wandering. Had he done the right thing? What would his colleagues think? What would the CEO say? The party was meant to be a formal affair, with investors and board members attending. Yet somehow, none of these concerns felt as important as the simple act of showing kindness to another human being. Little did Raj know that his spontaneous invitation was about to turn the corporate holiday party into an event that would be talked about for years to come. As the snow continued to fall outside his window, he couldn't possibly imagine how this one decision would not only change his life, but reshape the entire culture of Sterling Enterprises. The women's shelter was a warm, welcoming place that smelled of fresh paint and brewing coffee. Mrs. Kumar had called ahead, and they were greeted by Sunita, Raj's sister, who ran the shelter's preparation program. Her eyes sparkled with the same kindness that seemed to run in the family. "Welcome to Fresh Start," Sunita said, leading them through the brightly lit hallway. "We help women prepare for new beginnings here, whether it's for job interviews, court appearances, or special events." She glanced at Priya with a gentle smile, showing no judgment, only warmth. The transformation area was a spacious room with several stations, a hair salon setup, a clothing section with professional attire, and private changing rooms with shower facilities. Everything was organized with care and respect for dignity. "First, let's find you something comfortable to wear while we work on everything else," Sunita suggested, moving toward a rack of clean, casual clothes. But Priya surprised them all by pulling out a small toiletry kit from her worn backpack. I would appreciate a shower first, if that's possible, she said. Her voice carried that same educated tone that had caught Raj off guard earlier. Mrs. Kumar and Sunita exchanged glances. They'd clearly noticed it too. While Priya freshened up, Sunita pulled Raj aside. There's something different about her, she whispered. The way she carries herself, her speech patterns. I've worked with hundreds of women here, but she reminds me more of the corporate executives who come to give motivational speeches. Raj nodded, sharing his observations from the past months. As they talked, soft classical music drifted from the salon area, where Mrs. Kumar was chatting with the shelter's stylist about suitable looks for a corporate holiday party. When Priya emerged from the shower facilities, her transformation had already begun. Clean and free from the layers of street life, her natural grace was even more apparent. Her hair, now washed, was a rich dark brown with elegant silver streaks. Her face, cleaned of city grime, showed fine features and eyes that held wisdom beyond their years. Now, said the shelter's stylist, a cheerful woman named Ritu, let's talk about what look you're comfortable with. Nothing too flashy. We want you to feel like yourself. Priya sat in the salon chair, and for a moment, their eyes met in the mirror. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a shared secret. As Ritu worked her magic, Sunita brought over a rack of evening wear. These are all donated by professional women in the city, she explained. Many of them barely worn. Priya's eyes scanned the offerings with what appeared to be practiced expertise, occasionally touching a fabric or checking a label. Her hand stopped at a simple but elegant navy blue dress. This one, she said softly, if it's available. The dress was classic, the kind that could blend in at any corporate event while still commanding respect. While Priya changed, Raj waited in the lobby, wondering what the evening would bring. He'd already received several curious messages from colleagues who'd witnessed the scene in the office lobby. News traveled fast at Sterling Enterprises. When Priya finally emerged, everyone in the room fell silent. The transformation wasn't just physical. It was as if she had stepped into her true self. The navy dress fit perfectly, her silver-streaked hair was styled elegantly, and her makeup was subtle but professional. But it was more than that. She stood differently now, with a quiet confidence that seemed completely natural. Thank you, she said, looking at each person in turn. Your kindness means more than you know. There was something in her voice, a hint of emotion quickly controlled, that made Raj wonder again about her story. As they prepared to leave, Sunita pulled her brother aside one more time. Raj, she said quietly, I don't think you're just helping someone in need here. There's more to this story. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Whatever happens at that party tomorrow, you've done a good thing. Remember that. Raj looked back at Priya, who was graciously thanking Mrs. Kumar and the shelter staff. In the late afternoon light streaming through the windows, she looked less like someone who needed help and more like someone who could run the whole company. Little did he know just how close that observation would turn out to be. The Sterling Enterprises holiday party transformed the 30th floor conference space into a winter wonderland. Crystal decorations caught the light from the city skyline, making the room sparkle like fresh snow. The aroma of gourmet food filled the air as servers weaved through the crowd with trays of appetizers. Raj stood near the entrance, tugging nervously at his tie. He'd arrived early, wanting to be there when Priya arrived. His colleagues were already buzzing with curiosity. Word had spread about his unusual guest. Some thought it was a noble gesture, others whispered it was career suicide. The CEO, Mr. Kapoor, was known for his strict approach to corporate image. Did you hear? Whispered Meena from accounting to her group. Mr. Kapoor's wife still hasn't shown up. 3 months she's been gone, and nobody knows why. The group huddled closer, eager for office gossip. They say they had a huge fight about the company's new development project. Their chatter was interrupted by a subtle shift in the room's energy. Priya had arrived. She stood in the doorway, looking even more elegant than the day before. The navy dress moved gracefully as she walked, and her silver-streaked hair caught the light. But it was her presence that drew attention. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged in any room she entered. "Good evening," she said softly to Raj, her eyes twinkling with something that might have been amusement. Several executives nearby stopped their conversations, trying to place where they might have seen her before. As they moved through the party, Raj noticed something extraordinary. Priya wasn't just making small talk. She was engaging in detailed discussions about business strategy. When the chief financial officer mentioned their latest merger, she asked insightful questions about market impact. When someone brought up their urban development projects, her knowledge of zoning laws was impressive. "The displacement impact of the Riverside project needs careful consideration," she said during a conversation with the head of development. "Have you considered incorporating affordable housing units?" The executive blinked, surprised by her expertise. The party was in full swing when Raj overheard an interesting conversation between two board members. "It's the biggest decision we've faced this year," one was saying. "But Mr. Kapoor won't move forward without his wife's input. She's always been his moral compass in these matters." "If only we knew where she was," the other replied. 3 months ago, they had that heated discussion about corporate responsibility, and the next day, gone. Left nothing but a note saying she needed time to think. Raj's attention was pulled back to Priya, who was now deep in conversation with the company's sustainability director. "Your current approach to community impact is problematic," she was saying, her voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes you need to step away from the boardroom to truly understand the effects of your decisions." The room suddenly felt warmer, more crowded. Raj watched as Priya navigated the party with natural ease, each conversation revealing more layers to her mystery. She knew things about the company that weren't public knowledge. She spoke about their projects with the insight of an insider. The biggest surprise came when Mrs. Verma, a senior board member who rarely spoke to anyone below executive level, approached their table. "Your observations about our community outreach program are fascinating," she said to Priya. "You remind me so much of." Her voice trailed off, her eyes widening with sudden recognition. Just then, a stir of activity near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Mr. Kapoor had finally arrived. He looked tired, distracted, until his eyes scanned the room and locked onto Priya. The champagne glass in his hand slipped, crashing to the floor. The room fell silent. In that frozen moment, Raj finally understood. The dignified homeless woman he'd been bringing coffee to for months, the one he'd invited to this party out of simple kindness, wasn't just any guest. The truth was about to change everything, not just for him, but for the entire company. The shattered champagne glass echoed through the suddenly silent room. Mr. Kapoor stood frozen, his face a mixture of shock, relief, and something deeper, understanding. "Priya," he whispered, but in the quiet room, everyone heard it. Raj's mind was spinning. Priya Kapoor, the CEO's wife, the woman known for her fierce advocacy of ethical business practices, had been living on the streets outside their very building. The same woman he'd been bringing coffee to every morning for the past 3 months. "Hello, Arun," Priya said softly, using the CEO's first name. She stood gracefully, every eye in the room following her movement. "I think it's time we talked about the Riverside project." Mrs. Verma, the senior board member, stepped forward. 3 months. We've been worried sick. Your husband has been." She stopped, noticing the tension between the couple. Priya turned to address the room, her voice clear and steady. "For the past 3 months, I've been conducting my own impact study of our development projects. Not from behind a desk, not through statistics and reports, but from the ground level, from the streets." She gestured to where Raj stood, still trying to process everything. While our company discussed profit margins in heated boardrooms, I learned the real cost of our decisions. I lived among the people our riverside development would displace. I spoke with families who've called that area home for generations. I experienced firsthand what it means to have nowhere to go. Mr. Kapoor moved closer, his initial shock giving way to understanding. You could have told me, he said quietly. We could have found another way. Would you have really listened? Priya asked, not unkindly. Our last conversation about this ended with you saying I didn't understand the business realities. So I decided to understand something more important, the human realities. She reached into her small evening bag and pulled out a worn notebook. In here are 3 months of observations, stories, and insights that no official impact study could ever capture. Did you know that Mrs. Gupta, who sells tea near the riverside, puts 2 children through school with her earnings? Or that the local community has created an informal childcare network that helps single parents keep their jobs? The room remained silent, executives and board members hanging on every word. Some looked uncomfortable, others thoughtful. A few were nodding slowly. And then there's Raj, Priya continued, smiling at him warmly. Who showed me that kindness still exists in our corporate world? Who brought me coffee every morning without expecting anything in return? Who saw me as a human being, not a problem to be solved or a number in a report? Mr. Kapoor took the notebook with slightly trembling hands. You always said I needed to see the bigger picture, he admitted. I just never thought you'd go to such lengths to show me. Sometimes, Priya said, addressing not just her husband but the entire room, we need to step out of our comfort zones to truly understand the impact of our decisions. I chose to live on those streets not to prove a point, but to learn the truth. And the truth is, we can do better. Raj watched as understanding dawned on people's faces. This wasn't just about a CEO's wife returning. This was about transforming how the company saw its role in the community. The Riverside project doesn't need to be canceled, Priya continued. It needs to be reimagined. And thanks to my time on the streets, I know exactly how we can develop that area while lifting the community up rather than pushing them out. Mr. Kapoor looked at his wife with newfound respect, then turned to Raj. It seems I owe you a debt of gratitude, he said. You showed kindness to my wife when you thought she was just another person in need. That's exactly the kind of humanity this company should represent. As the buzz of conversation slowly returned to the room, Raj realized that this holiday party had become something much more significant than a simple corporate gathering. It was the beginning of a transformation, not just for Sterling Enterprises, but for everyone who witnessed what happened when someone chose to truly understand the human impact of their decisions. Little did he know that this was just the beginning of an even bigger change, one that would reshape not just their company, but the entire way businesses thought about community development. The party had transformed into something far more meaningful than a simple holiday celebration. Small groups huddled around the room, discussing what they'd just witnessed. The catering staff continued serving appetizers, but even they couldn't help stealing glances at the unfolding scene near the window. Mr. Kapoor led his wife to a quiet corner of the room, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city lights below. Raj couldn't help but notice how the same street corner where he'd first met Priya was visible from this height. The contrast was striking. From the streets to the penthouse, her journey had been extraordinary. You must have been cold out there, Mr. Kapoor said softly, his voice carrying hints of guilt and concern. His hand reached for hers, but stopped halfway, unsure. The cold wasn't the hardest part, Priya replied, completing the gesture by taking his hand. It was watching people hurry past, avoiding eye contact, pretending not to see. Well, most people. She glanced warmly at Raj, who stood nearby, still processing everything. Mrs. Verma joined them, clutching Priya's worn notebook. I've been reading your observations, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The community garden project the local women started, the evening classes the retired teacher holds in the basement of this shop. We would have destroyed all of that. More board members gathered around, drawn into the conversation. The party's festive atmosphere had shifted into something more purposeful. Someone had dimmed the sparkly holiday lights, and now the room felt like an impromptu board meeting, but one unlike any Sterling Enterprises had ever held. "Show them the drawings," Priya encouraged her husband. Mr. Kapoor pulled out his phone, displaying the original Riverside development plans. "Now," she continued, "let me show you what we could do instead." She borrowed a tablet from a nearby executive and began sketching with practiced ease. "See this area? Instead of luxury condos, we could create mixed-income housing. The ground floor could house all the existing small businesses with upgraded facilities. Mrs. Gupta's tea shop could become a proper cafe, but still affordable for local residents." The board members leaned in, captivated. This wasn't just about changing plans. It was about changing mindsets. "But the profit margins," someone started to say. "Will be different but sustainable," Priya finished. "And think about the long-term benefits. Happy communities support businesses. Businesses support communities. It's not charity, it's smart development." Mr. Kapoor watched his wife with growing admiration. "You could have just told me all this," he said quietly. "Would you have truly understood?" Priya asked. "Sometimes we need to feel something to really know it." She turned to the group. "I felt the fear of not knowing where to sleep. I felt the shame of being invisible. But I also felt the strength of a community that takes care of its own, even when they have almost nothing to share." Raj noticed Mr. Patel, the security guard, hovering at the edge of the group. The same guard who had tried to remove Priya from the lobby just yesterday was now listening intently, nodding at her words. "The homeless woman who shared her blanket with me during that cold snap last week," Priya continued. "She used to be a nurse. The man who organizes the food sharing program, a former teacher. These are real people with real stories, not statistics in a development report." The room had grown so quiet you could hear the ice clinking in glasses. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, adding a gentle backdrop to this moment of transformation. Mr. Kapoor straightened his shoulders, looking every bit the CEO, but with new warmth in his eyes. "I think," he said, addressing the board members, "it's time for an emergency meeting. Not tonight. We should all process what we've learned. But tomorrow morning, first thing. We're going to redesign this project from the ground up." He turned to his wife, then to Raj. "And we'll need both of you there. One to show us what we've been missing, and one to remind us why kindness should be at the heart of every business decision." As the party slowly returned to its celebratory mood, there was a new energy in the room. People who normally stayed within their department groups were mingling, sharing ideas, discussing what they'd learned. It wasn't just a company party anymore. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change not just Sterling Enterprises, but perhaps the whole way business looked at community development. The weeks following the holiday party brought dramatic changes to Sterling Enterprises. The large conference room on the 28th floor had been transformed into what employees now called the Community Hub. Its walls were covered with maps, photos, and stories from Priya's notebook, reminding everyone of the human side of their business decisions. On this particular morning, Raj found himself sitting beside Priya at the head of the conference table. The room buzzed with energy as team leaders from different departments shared their new initiatives. The old corporate stiffness had given way to genuine enthusiasm. "The local culinary training program is ready to launch," announced Meena from Community Relations, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've partnered with 5 restaurants near the Riverside development. They'll provide apprenticeships to residents who complete the training." Mr. Kapoor, who now insisted everyone call him Arun in these meetings, nodded approvingly. He changed, too, his trademark formal suits replaced by more casual business wear, making him more approachable to everyone. "And what about Mrs. Gupta's tea shop?" he asked, referring to the elderly woman whose small business had become a symbol of their new approach. "Even better than we hoped," Priya replied, smiling. She's not just getting a new space in the development. She's going to help train other vendors in business management. It turns out she has a master's degree in commerce that she never got to use fully. The room filled with appreciative murmurs. These were the kinds of discoveries Priya had made during her time on the streets. Hidden talents, untapped potential, and countless stories of resilience. Raj watched as his former morning ritual of bringing coffee to a homeless woman had snowballed into something extraordinary. The company had established a new community impact division, which he now headed. His team's first project: converting an unused company warehouse into a transition housing facility. The architect's plans are ready, Raj announced, pulling up the designs on the large screen. We've included everything the community asked for: job training classrooms, a daycare center, and flexible workspace for small business startups. The images showed a bright, welcoming space that looked nothing like traditional homeless shelters. Large windows, communal gardens, and areas for children to play. It was designed to give people dignity along with shelter. I have some news too, Priya added, her voice warm with excitement. Remember the retired nurse I mentioned? She's agreed to run our health clinic there. And that former teacher who organized the food sharing program? He's designing our adult education curriculum. Mr. Kapoor reached for his wife's hand under the table, a gesture not lost on Raj. Their relationship had grown stronger through this experience, their shared vision bringing them closer than ever. But here's what really makes me proud, Priya continued, opening her laptop. Take a look at these numbers. She displayed a chart showing the company's recent performance. Our new approach hasn't hurt our bottom line. It's improved it. Companies want to work with us because of our community-first approach. We're getting positive press without spending a penny on PR. The room erupted in applause when she showed photos of the first group of residents moving into the completed section of the transition housing. Among them was the woman who had shared her blanket with Priya during her time on the streets. She was now employed in the facility's kitchen, training others in cooking skills. As the meeting wound down, Raj noticed something remarkable. The invisible wall between executives and regular employees had crumbled. People lingered after meetings, sharing ideas, discussing ways to help the community. The security guard, Mr. Patel, even had his own committee now, coordinating with local shelters and outreach programs. You know what the best part is? Priya said quietly to Raj as others filed out of the room. Every morning, I still see people stopping to chat with the homeless individuals outside our building. That's how real change happens, one small act of kindness at a time. Mr. Kapoor joined them, loosening his tie. Speaking of kindness, he said, wait until they hear about our next project. Ready to take this model citywide? Raj looked between them, realizing that this was just the beginning. What had started with a simple cup of coffee was growing into something that could change countless lives. And to think, it all began because he chose to see the humanity in a stranger on a cold morning. Spring arrived, bringing with it the sweet scent of new beginnings. The abandoned warehouse that once stood as a symbol of urban decay had been transformed into New Horizons Center, its fresh paint gleaming in the morning sun. Today was opening day, and the excitement in the air was palpable. Raj stood at the entrance, greeting the mix of corporate executives, community members, and media who had gathered for the grand opening. The center was his pride and joy, the physical manifestation of how one small act of kindness could grow into something extraordinary. Can you believe this used to be a storage space for old office furniture? Mrs. Verma whispered to him, looking around in awe. The interior was bright and welcoming, with natural light streaming through large windows. Children's laughter echoed from the daycare center, while the smell of fresh bread wafted from the culinary training kitchen. Mrs. Gupta, now the head of their small business mentorship program, was giving a tour to potential investors. Her tea shop in the Riverside development had become so successful that she now helped others start their own businesses. See this space, she explained, gesturing to a row of small retail units. These will be incubator shops where people can test their business ideas with minimal risk. In the health clinic, the retired nurse who had once lived on the streets was training a group of volunteers. Healthcare isn't just about medicine, she was saying. It's about treating people with dignity. The clinic walls were decorated with colorful murals painted by local artists, making it feel more like a community center than a medical facility. Mr. Kapoor and Priya arrived together, looking more relaxed and happy than anyone had ever seen them. They stopped to chat with everyone, remembering names and asking about families. The CEO, who once rarely left his office, now spent regular time in the community, learning and listening. "Remember when you first invited me to that holiday party?" Priya asked Raj, her eyes twinkling. Who would have thought it would lead to all this? She gestured to the bustling activity around them. The center's computer lab was filled with people attending a job skills workshop. Through the glass walls, Raj could see Mr. Patel, the security guard, teaching a basic computer class. He had discovered a talent for teaching and now spent his free time helping others learn technology skills. The best part, Raj said, leading them through the facility, is that everything here came from community input. He pointed out the flexible spaces that could be used for different purposes: classrooms by day, community meetings in the evening, and emergency shelter during extreme weather. In the rooftop garden, they found Meena organizing the urban farming program. "We're growing vegetables for the culinary program," she explained proudly. "The extra produce goes to local families in need." Several elderly residents were tending to the plants, sharing their gardening wisdom with younger volunteers. A small group of business students from the local university had set up a free tax help desk. Next to them, a legal aid clinic offered advice on housing rights. The center had become exactly what they'd hoped: a place where people could find not just help, but opportunity. "You started something remarkable," Mr. Kapoor said to Raj. "Other companies are asking how they can replicate this model. We've had calls from businesses across the country." Priya added, "And it all started because you saw me as a person, not a problem." She paused, watching a group of children running past, their faces bright with hope. That's the real lesson here. Everyone has value, everyone has potential. Sometimes they just need someone to see it. As the day progressed, more success stories emerged. A former resident who had completed the culinary program was now working as a sous chef at a popular restaurant. A single mother who had learned coding through their technology program had just landed a job at a software company. The local news crew interviewed Mr. Kapoor about the company's transformation. "We've learned that business success and social responsibility aren't opposing forces," he explained. "They're two sides of the same coin. When we lift our community, we all rise together." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the windows, Raj looked around at what they had created. The center buzzed with energy, hope, and possibility. It wasn't just a building. It was a beacon of what could happen when business met humanity, when profit met purpose, and when simple kindness grew into something much bigger than itself. 1 year had passed since that fateful holiday party. The New Horizons Center was hosting its first anniversary celebration, but this wasn't just any corporate event. The large community hall was filled with a unique mix of people. Corporate executives in business suits mingled with former homeless individuals who were now successful entrepreneurs. Children ran around with face paint while their parents proudly showed off their small businesses. Raj stood near the entrance, greeting guests alongside Priya and Mr. Kapoor. The transformation over the past year had been remarkable, not just in the community, but in the way Sterling Enterprises did business. The company had become a model for corporate responsibility, featured in business magazines and studied by other corporations. "Look who's here," Priya exclaimed, waving to an elderly woman making her way through the crowd. It was the same woman who had shared her blanket with Priya during her time on the streets. Now she was running the center's mentorship program, helping others find their path to stability. "I never thought I'd be wearing a name tag that says Program Director," The woman laughed, hugging Priya. But here I am, teaching others how to rebuild their lives. The celebration was in full swing. In one corner, Mrs. Gupta's expanded tea shop had set up a beverage station, serving her famous masala chai to guests. Her business had grown so successful that she now employed 5 other people from the community. "Remember when you used to bring me coffee every morning?" Priya asked Raj, her eyes twinkling. "Now look at all this." She gestured to the room full of success stories. The walls were covered with before and after photos showing the center's journey. But more importantly, they showed the journeys of the people who had found hope here. There was a picture of Mr. Patel teaching his first computer class, now expanded into a full technology training program. Another showed the rooftop garden's first harvest, which had grown into a sustainable food program for the community. "Dad, Dad," called out a small voice. A little girl ran up to one of the program graduates who was now working as an IT professional at Sterling Enterprises. "I got an A on my math test." The proud father scooped her up, remembering how just a year ago, they had been struggling to find a stable place to live. Mr. Kapoor took the microphone to address the gathering. "1 year ago," he began, his voice warm with emotion, "my wife taught me the most valuable business lesson of my life. She showed me that true success isn't measured by profit margins alone, but by the lives we touch and the communities we build." He paused, looking around the room. "And it all started because one person chose to show kindness to a stranger. Raj didn't know he was helping my wife that morning when he first brought her coffee. He just saw someone who needed a moment of human connection." The room erupted in applause. Raj felt his cheeks grow warm, but his heart swelled with pride. The simple act of kindness that had started this journey had grown into something far bigger than himself. Priya stepped up next. "Today, we're not just celebrating a successful community center," she announced. "We're celebrating a new way of doing business. Sterling Enterprises is launching a nationwide initiative to help other companies create similar programs in their communities." The news was met with excited chatter. Representatives from other corporations were already taking notes, eager to learn from their success. As the evening wound down, Raj found himself back at the entrance, this time looking out at the city lights. The street corner where he used to meet Priya was visible from here, but it looked different now. The whole neighborhood had transformed, not just physically, but in spirit. A young woman approached him, holding her young son's hand. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "6 months ago, I was sleeping in my car. Now I have a job, an apartment, and my son is back in school. All because someone here believed in me." Raj smiled, remembering his own journey. "Sometimes," he replied, "all it takes is one person to see you, really see you, as a human being." As the celebration continued inside, Raj realized that this wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning. The ripples of kindness that had started with a simple cup of coffee were still spreading, touching more lives, creating more stories of hope and transformation. In a world that often seemed cold and indifferent, they had proven that compassion could be good business, and that one small act of kindness could indeed change the world.